Well, I'm interested in this.
That's usually reserve seats for these papers.
Okay, so we'll get to get you going.
Wait, I'm gonna let the door.
Okay. When it's shut, you can still get in. It doesn't bother if they come in.
To Jordan. Fantastic.
They're all right there.
Is this the
Rock
here?
and built.
Everyone will mute their phones.
Mute your phones. George?
You know, I was gonna call Bobby Craig.
You don't have to turn them off.
Put them on airplane mode.
That's all.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to introduce myself. We know who he is. But my name is Dave Zurick. And Athena, thank you very much for coordinating all this. And Gwen's with the Berea Arts Council, and Athena's with the library. And they're the ones that collaborate on these programs. So appreciate it very much. And I'm a photographer and a writer and a geographer. And all of my work always blends all three of those. Hey, Mitch. So it's always a little bit, which hat am I wearing at the time? And generally I'm wearing all of them. So I'm wearing all three of them in this particular case. What I want to talk about this afternoon and show some slides and pictures of is very different than the display that's in the glass cubicle in the library. If you saw that display, that one has to do with the kind of work I've been doing for the last 25 years, which is film-based photography, wet darkroom, printing, and the publications that come out of that sort of process. The images that I'm going to show here this afternoon are all color images. It's all digital work, and it's all Photoshop. So it's totally different. I've left the darkroom behind. I turned it into a yoga shack that Jennifer and I now use, so it's no longer even a darkroom. And that was, that was a shift, but it feels good. It's time for that. So this is the work that I'm going to show this afternoon is the stuff I'm working on currently. Last couple of years, a project that started in India a couple of years ago, and it's an ongoing project for me. Before I start this, because it is so different, and some of you may have been looking at the work in the display, and so you may have come in thinking I was going to talk about that. If you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer those before getting into this, because it really is two very different worlds, conceptually, in terms of methods, techniques, and everything else. So, and we can keep this very informal, folks. As I go along, if you have any questions about images that are up on the screen or something I'm saying, please go ahead and just ask. So did anyone come in here with any questions about that? And then we can just leave it right now. We'll go into this work. Fine. I'm going to dim the lights, and we're just going to use the images here. So this work here that I'm going to talk about and show images of is work that I started in an area of northwestern India. It's a semi-desert area in the state of Rajasthan. And this is an area that's known as Shekhawati. It's a collection of small, kind of scruffy little trade towns. Because historically, during the 16, 17, and 1800s, there was a major trade route connecting really the eastern regions of India across northern India and eventually across Pakistan and Afghanistan into the Mediterranean world. Kind of a little branch off of the Silk Road. And geographically, this region of Shekhawati kind of sits astride that Silk Road. So the towns that I'm going to be showing you pictures of are towns that have their geographic origins in that trade. And specifically the buildings in these towns that are so wonderful are buildings that were constructed and in a sense decorated and painted by traders who became wealthy from the trade in opium and silk that went through this particular part of India. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about my experience in this part of the world. You know, most of my work for the last 40 years has been in the Himalaya region, up in northern India, in the mountains of northern India, or Nepal, or Tibet. So I've dropped down into the desert. It's a very different place in all sorts of ways. And a lot of times in the past when I do these kinds of talks, I'm either talking about techniques or methods or geography or the conceptual framework for the imagery that I'm making. And I want to do something a little bit different and talk really about the experiences of being in a project. Most of my projects are multi-year. They are all excuses to spend a lot of time in that place. And so I want to talk about that a little bit with you because in a way, for me, as an artist, the value I gain out of being involved in art is the experiences of producing it and the discipline of vision that's involved in the sensory and emotional, you know, anchoring that occurs, you know, when you spend time in a place. So this is a semi-desert area. Deserts in this part of the world are crossed generally by camels. When you cross deserts on camels, you have all kinds of experiences. I was kissed by a camel once, which isn't as pleasant as it sounds. It probably doesn't sound pleasant. They're awful critters, actually. I mean, when you watch people handling camels, they handle them in a certain kind of a way. But anyways, in some cases, these towns that I've been working in are separated by little sandy roads like this. Other cases by tarmac roads, you can get around in buses and that type of thing. So the area that we're looking at is a cluster of towns. These are really all of these. I won't go through all the names, but Artisan, Noagar, Dunlod. All of these towns in red are the towns that I've been working in. And they are all in this Shekhawati area. This is the main highway. Jaipur is a large city in Rajasthan. Bikaner is another large city. So this is a main highway, and by a main highway, basically it's one lane in each direction, but trucks are going on it, buses are going on it, vehicles. When you get off into these smaller roads, some of them are tarmac, you know, asphalt covered, some of them are gravel, some of them are just sandy. But these are the towns that kind of owe their existence to this trade, the trade that occurred along the route through this desert. This is the Tar Desert here. It's a scrubby area. It's not a desert like the Sahara Desert. It's a semi-desert kind of a place. And people are still crossing it in caravans with camels. There's also lorries and buses and the rest of it going across it. But camel caravans are still very, very common here. So you find camels all over the place. The key to why these towns developed in the first place is they had water features associated with them. Either aquifers that were close to the surface, or ponds or springs that were then basically created as tanks, as ponds, concrete, that would either fill from surface water, or during the monsoon rain they would fill. And so really was the water, it's really the water that was key, because in these caravans coming across the desert, these became stopping over places. So very, very slowly these settlements started to emerge, and very, very slowly these towns developed, and very slowly then we have kind of this settlement in this part of the world. This is a herder here. Behind him is one of these ponds, and you notice there's a whole series of steps going up depending on the time of year, because we're right on the edge of the monsoon realm of South Asia. So depending on the time of year, there could be some monsoon rain that percolates into the aquifer, will collect in these tanks, and so the water level during the peak of the monsoon season may be all the way up to this step right here. These are called step wells.
Hey, Dave?
Yep.
When is monsoon season?
Mid-July to mid-September.
Okay.
Yeah. So this April, this is the hot season. If you went to this area right now, it's probably about 110 degrees, dry as a bone. So that's what's going on. So these tanks are very, very important. And they're still important for folks who may have access to other kinds of water resources, but for the herder, in this particular case, he brings his animals down to these tanks. These women go to these tanks to collect water, they go to bathe, they go to do laundry. So there's still a functioning place. And one of the most interesting things for me about these towns, and as we go through some of the imagery, you'll get a sense of this. These are lived-in places. The architecture is world-class in terms of its artistic component, but it isn't museum material. It's really a living diorama. When you're in these towns and you're walking around, you really feel like you're in a museum, but they're populated with folks. So I want to emphasize that there is that constant, ongoing human activity, and that's what brings these places alive. It's what makes them so beautiful for me, frankly. And it's one of the things that I was always kind of zeroing in on as I was working. So these camel caravans are coming, they're coming through the desert, they enter these towns, they move through the towns are filled with caravanaries, these kind of open courtyard stables where the animals are kept and where the traders will spend a night or 2 nights or whatever that they're doing on their way through these towns. So let's go into some of these places. They have this trade origin. This is a caravansary manager. He's one of the guys that would really coordinate the logistics for the traders, their herds, the camel caravans that would come through these towns. So he's kind of a key person in these towns. And the towns themselves are composed of a mix of architectures. The ones that I'm interested in, have been interested in, are the ones that dating back to the 1700s and 1800s. And these havelis, they're called, they're basically merchant homes, were built by wealthy traders. They were oftentimes painted in murals, just enormously beautiful murals. And this was happening in the 1700s and 1800s. By the 1900s, with the waning of the British colonial history and the kind of the independence of India, things started to change. Many of these trading families became very wealthy, and they essentially are now the tycoons of India, these same families. And so these homes, and these are all private homes, were abandoned, and essentially people left them beginning in the early 1900s as the families moved to Bombay and Delhi and Calcutta and these kinds of large cities. They are now the big industrial magnates of India. So these are the old family homes. Hey, Joe. These are the old family homes that are left, and there's all kinds of situations that emerge out of these places. In some cases, they're just totally abandoned and they're falling apart. In other cases, squatters have moved in, and they're residents in there. They're illegally, but they're residents in them. In some cases, they have watchmen taking care of them. So we're looking at places that have, a history of 200 or 300 years old. They're not maintained at all. They're falling apart. These are fresco murals, so it's basically paintings on wet plaster. Where they're exposed to the elements, they're falling apart. People are whitewashing over them. In some cases, the buildings are subsiding. So in a sense, this open-air art gallery is in a state of ruin, and it's essentially falling apart. What's going on? When you get into the interior of some of these buildings, and I'll show you how this works here in a little bit, where you have more protected places, the murals are in an exquisite condition, where there's not a lot of sunlight hitting them, not a lot of rain, there's not a lot of exfoliation of this plaster. You still have some extraordinary quality murals, but in all cases, the art that's within these buildings that make up these towns are unique in the world. I mean, there's really no other place like them. So these four guys are all traders, all descendants of these trade families. They're all these four guys are residing in their family homes. They're out drinking tea together in the morning, but so they're part of this continuation. They're the descendants of this history in these towns. Here you can see how elaborate these buildings can be. I mean, these are just magnificent. Again, they're private family residences that were constructed by an individual.
What are they constructed of?
They're constructed of, well, it's basically a lot of timber works with plaster, with brick with plaster over it, stone with plaster over it. Basically, even kind of an adobe wall materials in some cases. So it's a mix of things, but it's a desert environment, so it's more of what we would think of as an adobe plaster or a brick with adobe plaster cover on it. And then, you know, these are just, you can see the entire wall, this is the exterior wall here, covered with these paintings. And I'll show you some close-ups of these paintings in just a bit. Well, here's one here. Just incredibly elaborate. This is the ceiling of a room, so it is very protected. So the colors are still very, very vivid in these interior rooms. Here's to give you a little sense of the scale, this is, this elephant figure right here it's the elephant itself is probably about 5 or 6 feet, you know, from height going across. You come across these places constantly. My here's a better one. Here's the scale here, so you can see how big some of these are. You know, when you walk through these towns, and I generally have been working in the winter here. I prefer the winter. It's a foggy time. It's cold in the mornings, and you know you're walking down these streets, and these buildings and people are just appearing. It's like you're just moving through a storybook almost. Things are just appearing and disappearing through the mist, and it's really a kind of a remarkable experience. As a photographer, you know, I mean, there's a lot that someone could do in a place like this. My interest has been primarily working as, you know, a geographer and a photographer, working in the sense of this relationship all the time between human society and, in this case, the built environment. So I'm always kind of bringing people into the picture in one way or another. So right now I'm working with a little camera. I mentioned before I'm switching out of, I've moved from film to digital. I used to use a big, large format sheet film camera, and I'm using just this tiny little Sony camera now. But I still use it the same way. I put it on a tripod, I still use the cloak and everything. The process is still the same. The technology has switched out for me. So in photographing these kinds of places, what I generally kind of do is I go into a little town like this, and I spend a couple of days not taking pictures, just kind of scouting around, seeing what's going on, what the light is like, meeting people, talking about stuff, and then I'll get situated in a certain spot where I know there's going to be a certain amount of activity of one form or another, and I just kind of plunk myself down. And you know, for photographers, there's different ways to think about this. I mean, the street photographers always talk about kind of capturing the moment, and my approach has always been anticipating the moment. Looking at things, seeing how things work, and then putting yourself in a place where things are happening around you. So it's a very slow, very deliberative process, what I do. I'm not roaming around with the camera, clicking away, trying to catch stuff on the run. It's always like just really slow. I'm moving very slow. I get into a place, I might sit in a place for an hour and really never take a photograph because the situation doesn't happen. You know, the light isn't there, the movement isn't there, whatever it is that I'm looking for. So these towns, again, if you can imagine this, I mean, this is just a private residence, this guy's just going to work. But the murals themselves, and I'll show you some close-up, these murals were painted by artists that were commissioned by these merchants. And they span a period of time where, depending on the age of the building, and therefore the age of the paintings, they reflect different aspects of Indian society and Indian culture. In some cases, they're capturing religious sentiments or religious iconography, Hindu iconography, deities of various sorts, or Hindu mythology. In some cases, they're capturing kind of everyday secular life. In some cases, they're capturing colonial life. They're basically, the murals are representing what's going around in that town at the time the artist was making the mural, was painting the mural. And so in some cases where you have a building that was painted over a long period of time by multiple painters, the facade of the building will actually capture a long history, a long social history in terms of the content of the imagery. Yep.
Are those windows boarded up, or are they shuttered, or?
These look like they're shuttered. These windows, all in these buildings, have these double wooden, basically shutters that they close and open. And they'll open them, you know, for air and light, and then they shutter them up to hold either heat or coolness depending on the time of year. So basically it's the ventilation system that you're looking at here. It's possible some of them could, in this case it's not, this is one that's actively being lived in, but in some cases they would be shuttered up if the family has abandoned it or they're not using it and they don't want anybody coming in, because there are vandals who will come in and wreck things, so that could be going on there.
There's no glass in them.
Huh?
There's no glass?
No, there's no glass. There's very, very little glass. You'll find glass in all the modern buildings, but in the old buildings. And when I stay in all these old buildings, and they all look very romantic, I understand. They're great places and I love it, but they're musty, old, hot, dark, smelly little interiors for the most part, you know. I've spent a lot of sleepless nights trying to breathe inside some, dank little room someplace. So there isn't any glass, there isn't any screens, or anything like that, yeah. This one here, this is in the main bazaar of one of these towns, the main marketplace, and even here, you've got repurposed buildings it's happening constantly. I'll show you some other pictures of this, but if you look, all of them are really covered with paintings, and you get posters pasted over the top, you get whitewashed kind of stuff. It's magnificent works of art that are in here. It would be a national monument. These towns would be national monuments. And I've been working with a restoration architect she's been involved with the major monuments in India, places like Ajanta and Khajuraho. These are the major monuments in India, and she's very keen on doing something in these Chakravarti towns. The problem is these are all still privately owned structures. And what has happened over time is that the descendants have branched out so wide that the ownership is so fragmented for any particular building, like the villas of Tuscany that are in ruins. It's because you have now a building that may be owned by 50 different families, and trying to get them all to agree to do something is almost impossible. So as a result, they just kind of sort of fall apart. That's what's essentially going on. That's why it's very, very difficult to try to either reclaim or restore or preserve these structures. It's a huge problem. But you get up close on some of these murals, and again, we're kind of just picking out a mural, if you can imagine one of these, and just getting up close on it. There's all kinds of aspects that you might find, and I won't go into all of the details on all of these, but this is one of the early rulers of this region, a guy by the name of Ganga Singh. And part of the history of this region is that there were hereditary lines of rulers, rajas. This is a state called Rajasthan. Stan means land of, so the land of rajas is the land of kings. These are princes and kings, members of royalty, that would control vast areas, including areas that became these towns. And they wouldn't necessarily live in the towns. In fact, they still live in old forts and palaces. And they may be on the outskirts of these towns, they may be totally away from these towns. But this whole lineage adds another level of complexity to it, because while India is a secular democracy, the social influence of these rajas, these families of rulers, is still very strong at the local level. So it's impossible to do anything without their participation, essentially. And these are people that, some of these people are just wild. There's a lot of stories with all these. There's some whacked out people here, I can tell you. Just people, if you can imagine a long history of a line of people who are just used to this incredible wealth and getting what they want and doing what they want, and this sense of entitlement that we talk about here is so thick and so deep, and to try to cut through that and get anything done for the greater good, I mean, it can be almost impossible. So this is imagery. This is Krishna, one of the Hindu deities, Lord Krishna, and one of his concerts. You know, Krishna is a goddess that had a lot of farm maidens hanging around all the time. So a lot of this imagery is linked to various deities. Here's another example. This is a doorway into a haveli. You can see how beautiful these are. What's going on here is they're basically whitewashing, and somehow, for some reason, they stopped right here, which meant that these are still preserved. But underneath this whitewash would have been other murals. Some cases there's moisture that's penetrating up, and you get, you know, the walls are flaking off, and so they just get patched in various kinds of, you know, riggings of one sort or another. But it's a hodgepodge you end up with. People put graffiti over them, that type of thing. So these girls are heading off to school. You can see the building behind them, and again, this is a case where there's been some moisture that has basically rotted out this lower region that's flaking off. But these murals are still in pretty good shape. This one right here, I may have a close-up of that. That's actually a beautiful kind of an abstract mosaic now. It was an elephant, but there's just little flakes of color that's left in that mural. Then you go inside these buildings. You know, these havelis from the exterior, you go through a doorway like this, and it leads into a labyrinth of courtyards. So that if you can imagine what you're looking at right here is one haveli, but it would go back and there would be courtyards leading into courtyards leading into courtyards. And so you can get deeper and deeper into these places. And then you get into these interior courtyards where it is more protected from the elements. It is more protected just from people, passers-by, just kind of wrecking the walls. Less light coming through, and you get the colors that are much more vivid, and you get some really extraordinary situations where then you can get into some of this work that still retains this vividness. I mentioned that one of my interests in this, and it cuts through all of my work, is, you know, the presence of people. I mean, these towns exist because of people. The form that these towns currently take is because of people. And in the case of these towns, it's not just the traders who built the structures and the painters who painted the murals and the descendants who have abandoned the buildings. It's all the other people in these towns. And so that's part of the work that I'm doing in these towns, is working with the inhabitants. This guy is a squatter, so he's living in one of these havelis. He doesn't have anything to do with the family, he doesn't own it, it's just a protected place for him to be. And a lot of these guys are tacitly allowed to stay because their presence, in a way, keeps other people at bay in some of these buildings. So it's to their benefit. This is a group of street workers here. This is a beautiful, beautiful haveli here. They're actually doing a repair job on the road, but it's been all whitewashed here. So all of the murals that would have continued through this wall now are covered up as part of a kind of an urban renewal project, which, you know, when you look at it, you kind of shake your head and say, oh, well, that doesn't seem right, but they're spiffing the place out. That's what's going on. A lot of the street level rooms of the havelis have been over time repurposed and used differently now. So this is a bangle maker here. So he's occupying a little cubby hole in one of these havelis, and he's fronting onto the road. So he's making bangles in this spot. This guy is a tailor. So again, it's one of these larger havelis, and in some cases they've worked out some deal where they're paying rent maybe to the owner. In some cases they're not. There's all kinds of hidden negotiated relationships behind the scenes that nobody will ever know about. I mean, it's just so deep and thick back there. But in the end, you've got folks who are involved in these kinds of micro enterprises, non-formal labor of all sorts, vendors, craftspeople, who are occupying spaces at the street level in these old avelis. There's a potter, similarly. He's doing the same thing. He's got his kiln set up in one of these little rooms in these avelis. So these folks, over time, and these towns are out of the way. There are people, Rajasthan is a popular tourism destination in India. There are some very famous places in Rajasthan that receive a lot of visitors. Not this part of Rajasthan, but people travel through this part of Rajasthan to get to those other places. So periodically, people will be coming through and they spend, an hour looking at some buildings, and then they're on their way to where they're going. So when I would be there, for a whole day, and they're small, so you just kind of run into people all the time, and they're kind of curious that you're still there, and then the next day, and I'm still there a week later, and they're just, when is he going to leave? That type of deal. But it allows you then to meet people, and the beauty of being in a place is connecting with the people who live in that place and learning about their stories. So these photographs, the portraits of the people who live there, come out of those sorts of relationships. And all of them are so rich, and they're so beautiful, and it really just, that's why I do this, So, and they're all different, every single one. This woman is married to a man who is a descendant of one of the wealthy trading families, and they have maintained their haveli in outstanding condition. It's a gorgeous structure. They're just wonderful folks. When I go back, and I go back multiple times now, and I revisit them, and it's always almost like a little homecoming with a lot of these folks now. So in a sense then, if we can think about it, we've got a geographic locality, a semi-desert area with this history, an economic history of trade that has created these towns. And then these towns are populated early on by wealthy people who built these ornate structures called havelis that they were painted. And then we now have these havelis abandoned, and we have all kinds of people now flowing through these spaces as squatters, as bangle makers, as potters, as priests. This guy is a imam. He is basically a clergy in a local mosque. A lot of these towns are both, they have a Muslim component as well as a Hindu component, and it's very interesting because most of these traders were Hindus, but over time, many of them now are inhabited by Muslim families. So you just get this tremendous mix that happens now. I'm not quite sure why I stuck this picture in here. I think it just something didn't get out. These are the women that were working on the road, and I just love this image because this woman is obviously coming from a very wealthy family. Yeah. Just starts coming down the street, and all the work stops, right? Was checking this person out, walking.
I like the way the last woman to the left there. Yeah, got her hands on her hip, looking at it. It's like
she hot.
Yeah, exactly.
Something. Yeah. Well, if you look at all of their faces, really, a lot of them are. This guy right here. He's catching the last little glimpse. Yeah. But anyways, it was an interesting thing. I was photographing these women when this person started coming through, and it was interesting. The dynamics just starts to change. The whole energy starts to change. Very, very fascinating. Wow. So let's go inside a few of these buildings a little bit further. We should look at a couple of those rooms, but basically you go through these doors, and again, there are no windows. That's a good point. Bob, you brought it. all the doors, all the windows are essentially wooden or metal doors. A lot of iron, ironwork. They're built to last kind of places. So you get into these, and these are the interior courtyards, and again, many of them are large, so they're open to the sky, so you get all that the light from the sky coming in, and you have people just living their life out. And in this particular case, this is a woman who is part of a family that is, they're essentially squatters. They're occupying a Haveli. They don't own it. The owner has allowed them to stay there because by them being there, it means someone else isn't going to show up and wreck the place because they basically take care of it. So they live in it, and multiple generations of people will do this. Yeah.
Is it plumbed?
Very rarely. Some of them would be. This is what you're looking. Are you looking at this right here? This has got there's some electricity. They're all different. It all really there's no general rule to any of it. Generally, they wouldn't be plumbed, and generally there wouldn't be electricity unless there's been some investment by some family member to do it. You looking for a job?
Well, I was just seeing how easy it would be to get under that.
Yeah, that's easy work there. No, but it is. It's all very, very different, Mitch. One from another. Plumbing in the way that you and I have a sense of plumbing, no. But there would be, in some cases, yeah, some delivery lines that would get water in somewhere, for sure. So you go into these Havelis, you go through these courtyards, and then this life just starts unfolding, you know. And it's very quiet. It's cool inside here. It's you're protected. And in this part of the world, many parts of the world that have settlements built like this, those exterior walls that you see from the road hide where life is lived, which is in these courtyards. I mean, that's where life is unfolding in these courtyard settings, and they're private spaces, and they're lovely little spaces. And in this case, they're just so gorgeous because of all these paintings. This is a room that was used as a dancing room. So if you can imagine, in the 1700s, the musicians would be up here, tabla players, sitar players, playing ragas. There would be dancing girls down in the lower floor. You'd have these wealthy traders smoking hookahs, sitting on pillows. So that's what this room was right here. That would be the use of this room right here. Now, this is, here someone has been, this is all soot damage, so they basically have had fires and cooking fires and that kind of stuff. So this is in a state of disrepair. So here we've got this is pretty well intact, and it's a very nice setting. And this is equally fine. It's just that it's been deteriorated away for a while. But the architecture, the design, the attention to detail. I mean, all of this is all carved. It's just exquisite work. So what's happening is this. Partly what's happening is this. In some cases, the buildings are just being allowed to just, go their way, slowly decay and deteriorate. In some cases, they're actually being physically removed, raised, and put other buildings, modern buildings, put in. All of it is happening in different places at different rates. So you come across, buildings that you can see are just in the state of ruin. Here's a place that's just being knocked down. This is the lane right here on the backside. This is in pretty good shape, and they're all this juxtaposition is happening everywhere you go. Every time it's like every direction you turn, and every time you turn a corner, there's a new configuration of this in terms of the work, the artwork that's there, the state of the building, the design of the architecture itself. So it's a remarkable setting in that way. And again, there are people who recognize the beauty of these places, but the majority of folks in these towns are just living, and this is just where they live. And there's not a huge amount of attention being put on preserving these places, or even recognizing them from a distance aesthetic point of view, like we might view a building like this. There are folks who intellectualize in that way, but most folks do not. Most folks are just living their life, and they're living in an extraordinary place, and this is progress, for a lot of these people. So this is a huge valley that's just about gone now. That's I'm sure a building will come in its place at a certain point. And this guy's job, you know, he's the demolition man. So all of this is happening, and it's changed. Each time I go back to these towns, they're different. It's quite amazing how fast it's happening. I mean, you know, I'll be looking for a building that was there, and I knew it was there, and I can't, and I think I'm disoriented, and I'm asking people and say, oh no, it was knocked down 3 months ago. You know, that type of situation. That's how fast it's actually happening.
So when they build a new building, are they trying to match any of the styles? Or
No,
it's
just whatever. Concrete, glass, multi-story square blocks. Yeah. No effort to match this.
I'm amazed these things lasted as long as they did, without the use of rebar or anything. It was pretty crude.
It's, yeah, whoops, here, you actually can get a sense of that, just that really, yeah, it is. They're not rebar, but, I mean, people know how to build. They know how to build for a long time. It is a semi-arid environment, for one thing. So it does have that going, you know, there is a little bit of rain here, but it's not.
Does it ever freeze?
It would get down to, 2 years ago I was there, it was the coldest winter that anybody could remember, and there were days where it was like 30 degrees. So you're not gonna have freeze and thaw action that's going to erode, you know, water inside so you don't have that, yeah.
Or is this an earthquake region?
No, it's not an earthquake prone region, so it's not earthquakes that's doing it. It's just kind of time and inattention. But there are, yeah, it's not an earthquake region. There would be a little bit like tiny little tremors from somewhere up in northern Pakistan, 600 miles away. But there's no real slippage happening in this area.
How many times have you been here now?
1, 2, 3, maybe 4 times. 2 times really seriously. 1 time just checking it out. 2nd time trying to feel if there was a project there, and the last 2 times seriously. To give you a little sense of scale, this is someone's handprint. So this is a small. I mean, it looks larger than it is. It's kind of a little bit. But this is one of my favorite murals because of the handprints actually. So someone took paint and just, you know, just right up on the walls. Quite extraordinary. Here's a, you know, leftover. I mean, all of this area has been cleared out now. You know, during the latter stage of all of this, when these paintings were being made in the early 1900s, because they were made up until 1930, about 1930, 32 is when it stopped. You started picking up now things coming in from the West. Automobiles the British were bringing in, for example. So cars start showing up in these latter paintings. And again, here's some more handprints. So you can have a sense of the scale. Really odd things like some of these murals were scenes of Wales or Scotland that were like sort of almost upside down. It's like someone was looking at a coffee tin and using it and then painting from it, but not understanding it other than just the image itself. So you get these very, very odd, beautiful arrangements of things in these little murals. This is inside one of these Havelis. This is one of these Raja ancestors of a family that is now the Tata family. If that name sounds familiar, this is one of the major multi-billionaire families of India. The Tata, I think they just bought Peugeot, and they bought, I think they own some of the major automobile companies now. So it's huge. These are huge families now. That come out of this. They're coming out of the Chakravarti. This image here, a little story behind this. These are 2 brothers, and they are the 2 brothers, descendants of one of these very, very important trading families. This is their family Haveli here. This is their accountant, and they currently are traders. If you guys are familiar with some of this big Indian furniture, big dressers, big doors, big stuff you can buy here, it's coming out of Rajasthan. And if you ask the gallery owner where you buy this stuff. You buy it, probably in Lexington you get it, or Asheville, North Carolina, someplace, and you ask them where it's coming from. The owner has gone to one of these cities called Jodhpur in Rajasthan, because that's the center of the marketing of this, but they're made still in Shekhawati, and Shekhawati is famous, going back a long time, for its woodworking. So these guys own one of these big woodworking factories, I guess is what you'd say. And so this is their family Haveli. This is the accountant for their business. And this is their go-to guy. He just gets things done. And this is the family guru. Most of these large families have a guru, a baba, a sadhu that they are patrons of. They basically take care of this person. He provides spiritual teachings, and he officiates at weddings and funerals and special events, and so he's kind of on a retainer. So anyways, this family, these two guys in particular, I've gotten to know very well, and we talk about what I'm doing and stuff. And so this guy, Deepak, says, well, let's get this all together and we'll recreate what my grandfather would have done. So that's what this is. This is a recreation of when, back in the 1800s, and the traders would come in and the merchants would host them, and they'd have tea, and then they'd do their deals and stuff. So they kind of, and they did this, they took like about a half a day and did this, and they, well, come on back, at 5 o'clock, and we'll have it all set up, So it was a very cool thing. So we had a lot of fun with it, and they were pulling out just fascinating stuff. I mean, these Havelis, these homes are filled with stuff. Not just the structure itself, but they're filled with stuff. It goes back several hundred years, you start pulling this stuff out, It's just cool, all of it is so cool stuff, and we couldn't fill up the whole room, but we pulled out a few key elements. And all this stuff is like hundreds of years old, everything you're looking at here.
What is he holding, the one?
Well, he's just holding a little, like a staff that would signify his position in society, and he's got the family sword
Right.
here, like that kind of stuff. So, in the end then, this is the last image here I'm going to show, and then you go ahead to talk or answer any questions you have. In the end then, we've got these young kids. This is in a school. This is a Haveli that's been repurposed as a school. So we've got these kids who are in the school who may or may not trace their own family line back to these traders, but they're certainly living in this world, and they're living in these towns that goes back, all this time. And, the connections between their life, their young life, as a young school kid, and how they see their life unfolding and so forth, and then linking back into that past, it's just so rich, it's so wonderful, and these kids are walking through this world that constantly reminds them of who they are, my work as a geographer has always focused on how our cultural memory is transcribed in the landscape. So we are building our world because it reflects who we are. And when we go out into that world, and we like it or we don't like it, we have to see it as a reflection, it's a mirror unto who we are. And as we erase our past from the landscape, remove these old buildings, remove this, and it's happening here in Kentucky, you all know what I'm talking about, we lose these constant, tangible reminders of who we are. And that's happening here at a very quick pace. And so for these young kids, it will be more difficult for them to know who they are, because that physical, tangible marker of their past is being obliterated so fast from the landscape. You and I have a very different, those markers in our past are so rare that we set them aside as museums and historical markers, and we visit them as tourists. And that may happen to some of these really splendid buildings here, but that's very different than just kind of walking through these spaces and living in them and occupying them, because they're real. They're not this separate, disconnected thing that we go and read a plaque and hear about somebody who did something so much. So that's why I'm doing it. One of the things that I want to do with this project. I'm working with this architect in India's. I'm trying to get a publisher for a book. Most of my stuff is multi-year stuff, and I don't really do much in the way of exhibitions, but in this case, I would like to put together a series of pop-up 1 to 2 day exhibitions of large-scale images and set them up in the town centers, in these little towns, and move through these towns. So that's kind of where I'm going for with this in terms of an exhibition. So that the folks who live in these towns, because they're around them all day, they don't necessarily recognize the treasures that they're living within. To see them through the eyes of a foreigner, basically, is sometimes helpful because it allows you to get outside yourself for a moment and look again at them. So that's one of the plans, with this project.
Do the brothers, have you talked about with them?
Yes. Yeah, I'm trying to get a buy-in with all these folks on this so that they become part of the process. Yeah, so I'm hitting up the wealthy families. I'm not having any luck, but I'm hitting them up. Yeah.
You talked about the furniture
Yeah.
being made there.
Yes.
The rugs in the previous picture, are they made locally?
Not necessarily. If they're cotton, what are called cotton duries, there's a woven cotton rug, they'd be made there. And I'm not sure which one exactly you're talking about. Also, they would be part of the trade items that would have come through there. Because the trade was primarily in silk fabric, textiles, and opium. So those rugs could have been made. There's a place in north central India called Madhya Pradesh, which was a major center of these large area rugs back in the 1800s. It could have been from there.
We have an Indian rug that we got from Pier 1, and I was just wondering what area that would come from.
What's it made out of? Is it cotton? Is it wool?
Wool.
Okay, yeah, probably from north central India. The stuff that's coming out of Rajasthan is mainly cotton stuff. It varies. It's probably not Rajasthan. Rajasthan isn't known for its rugs. Period. Except for these cotton duries, which are these real thin, lightweight kind of rugs, more functional rugs, not so much decorative.
What's the population in these towns generally? And how do they
That's a great
work?
question. The small ones would be maybe 3,000 people, and the large ones would be maybe 18,000.
And so what's the economy like?
The economy is, well, first of all, they're all poor towns. I mean, there's not a lot of wealth, except for the wealth that's concentrated in these families. And that is wealth that was generated from a couple of centuries ago, or it's wealth that represents the new enterprises of these family members somewhere else. Now, they're not dumping a lot of that back into these towns, so there isn't like this remittance economy where the money's flowing back in. But there's still some of it that has pooled up there and has never left. Otherwise, it's craft artists, bangle makers, all kinds of stuff, potters. It's all small scale. Nobody's making a ton of money, as if all the Berea crafts people, nobody makes a ton of money off of making stuff with your hands. So, but they're doing it, so they're getting by that way. There's a certain kind of a service economy linked to schools and clinics and that type of stuff. So it's a mix of, really a mix of stuff, but none of it is huge. It's not a bustling vibe. These are sleepy little places for the most part. And on the outskirts then, it's all farmers. And the farmers will come in, so there is this farming economy that comes into the city in the sense of the marketplace and stuff like that. So that's also part of what's going on in these towns.
The furniture factory you were talking about, is that local?
Yes,
Now that,
handmade furniture.
that appears to be a desert area. Do they import the lumber?
We're right on the outskirts. There's a tree called the Keshwa tree, which is indigenous to Rajasthan, which gets about this big, which is an excellent hardwood for some of the lumber. Some of the lumber is coming from the southern part of Rajasthan, where it's closer to the wetter region, and it's shipped up. So those are the two main. There's only a couple of woods that they work with. It's not elaborate. It's not like mahogany and teak and stuff you find elsewhere in India. it's really good structural stuff, but it's not for woodworkers. It's not like a fine wood. It's, you know, like the Indian furniture stuff you got looks beautiful because it's been stained and it's been made to look old. It's like in Bali, Jennifer and I were in Bali one time, you go into the shops and you look at stuff and you go, well, do you want a new antique or an old antique? So they just take stuff and make it look old, you know, they bang chains on it and stuff like that. You know? Well, the first time I heard that, I got such a kick out of it. Perfect, you know? I'll have a new antique. Yeah.
How approachable are the people who live there?
Well, very few speak English.
Okay.
So that's going to be an immediate area. You will find people who do speak English, and they will be an entree in, but then they're either going to be hooked up in some way to the tourism economy, or they could be school teachers, or they could be some kind of professional person. Apart from that, these towns, and I've been, you know, spending time in India for 40 plus years, these towns are wonderful, old, quiet, intimate India. Very friendly, very pleasant. But you can't just blast on through. I like to go alone. I want to get Jennifer in these towns at a certain point. She hasn't been there yet. I like to go alone because you open yourself up when you're alone. You know, you go in with two people, there's two of them, they can take care of each other. You go in alone, people feel, like I said, oh my God, what's he doing here by himself? You know, that type of thing. So I always travel alone. All my life I've always traveled alone for that. Partly I like to be alone, partly the anonymity of that, but partly because I know that it opens me up to experiences that otherwise would never ever happen.
So, on the logistics, when you go into a small town,
Yep.
is there a hotel or you
No.
stay with people?
There's
food
different
and all that?
situations. Caravanseries, which were set up to accommodate travelers, and then, I mean, it's not great shakes, you know, we're talking some pretty, you know, you just kind of hold your breath and hope the night passes, you know, those kind of places. So there's those. There are some governments, what they call the government rest houses for government workers who pass through. And those are also kind of bare bones things, but they're fine. And there's usually a little kitchen where you can get somebody to cook you something. There's no restaurants and there's no hotels in these towns. There's a couple of guest houses that I have found that are great. And they've been set up because people have the inkling that these are such great little places that one day maybe tourists are going to come. You know, so if you build it, they'll come. So there are some of these, and there's one that I love staying in there because the food's so good. It's run by a couple, and they both love to cook. And when I show up, it's like, oh man, this guy, he likes food, you know. So it's a great thing. And then there's also some of these, and these are like way over the top. Maharaja palaces that you can stay in, and they can be elaborate. These are found throughout India, and Shekhawati is at a different scale than the really famous ones, but they're always extremely quirky, and some descendant who owns the place is always there, and you take them into these rooms, and they'll take you into, this is my grandfather's parlor, and you go in, and it's like, boom, it's like 1929. You go everything, you know, the radio, the chandelier, and it's just amazing. So I love that kind of stuff, you know. So yeah, it's possible to do it that way. Generally speaking, people blast on through. They don't really spend the night in these towns, so they're not set up that way. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Do you ask people to pose for you? Are they shy around camera?
I don't ever. This is an important question. How do you take pictures of people? I never aim cameras and take pictures of people unless I have a relationship with them already. And the main thing for me is to try to work with someone in such a way that they see a little bit what it is that I'm seeing, so they could understand why that might be a nice photograph. And sometimes that never happens. Sometimes it takes days. In some cases, with some of these folks, it took multiple trips. And then, I don't know if I just wore them out or what, but they said, yeah, okay, you know, let's do it, all of a sudden it's fine, you know? So, it's always the result of a relationship.
Now
And
that
that's the beauty of it, really, is that relationship.
Now you've gone digital, I'm sorry.
What about the photograph of the street workers and the woman that was?
I went by one morning, they were working. I was just watching, you know. Then I came by another morning, and I'm gonna take this, the light was beautiful. So then I set my gear up, because I'm not just like pulling my camera out and taking pictures. I got the tripod, I've got my stuff, even this little camera, I do the same thing. I make more than a big deal out of it. I make it a theatrical event. So I get the tripod out, and I get the camera, and I get the cloak, and and as soon as anybody said no, I'd fold it all down. But in that case, it's like they've already kind of, okay, well, something's going on here, let's just let it flow, and it works out fine, you know? But if I ever got the inkling, because I'm very sensitive to it, if I ever got the inkling, and a lot of times I know right off the bat, no, this isn't the right situation, and I won't even attempt it, or I will close it all down and walk away. But in this,
That woman walked into your picture.
she walked into the picture. It was like she knew I was there. I wasn't like pulling a. She was walking into the picture. Exactly.
She wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah. And that's fine, you know, no problem. So, yeah.
Dave, there's another photo in there, like probably in the first third, where there's a gal coming around the corner who's obviously carrying something.
Yeah, she's carrying a tiffin, a 3. Have you guys ever seen the movie Lunchbox? If you want a great little movie, it's called Lunchbox. You know, in India, there's a tradition. Workers would have their meals delivered to them by, well, in traditional sense, men would have their meals delivered from their home, cooked by their wife, and the guys who would deliver them were specialists in delivering these meals, and they would stack these little metal containers that are stackable, and they'd have codes on them, and they would take them all over these cities. So she was taking a meal to someone, is what she was carrying that. By the way, with Lunchbox, just to get you interested, have you ever seen that movie? So the lunch ended up in the wrong place, and this led then to a romance between two people that otherwise wouldn't have happened. It's a beautiful little movie. It's really cute. It's a lovely movie. You can get it on Hulu and Netflix or something like that.
Do any of these people in the pictures end up with the picture,
The picture?
Or a book?
Yes, to both of those. Not a book in this case because there isn't one yet, but hopefully there will be. And I kind of want to go back with a stack of books with Jennifer and give books out. But the last time I went back with a stack of prints and gave those out. So yes, I did that.
Going back to that picture though, she wasn't aware you were shooting them?
Well, I was set up. There's a little stealth to all of this. I'm not hiding behind bushes, but in this case, I'm up on a platform on a porch, and I've got the tripod, and I'm just sitting there and watching the light and watching people move, and taking imagery. So in this case, it's a public space. It's like if you took your camera out on the curb and took a picture of somebody riding their bike down the road. It's the equivalent of that, But when you get into someone's own private space, of whatever, then it's a totally different thing. But when they're moving through public space, and I'm not like hiding, and I'm not sort of like sneaking around.
You're fair game.
Another one way to put it.
They're fair game.
They're fair. Jennifer said they're fair game. I wouldn't use that same word. Yeah.
I'm thinking of your perspective, your perception, because you live in the United States, you're well-traveled. The children don't really have much of an awareness, you said, of the history and the architecture and their surroundings. But the wealthy people, do they travel? Do they have an awareness of really what they're inhabiting and what they live around in their
Some of them
environment?
do and a lot of them don't. I mean, they can travel and they might not have that awareness because they can travel. They may have that awareness and don't care and don't do anything. I mean, it's the same thing here, And so it's all of that, all those are possibilities. The two brothers in that one recreated image, they have an awareness. And that's why they're kind of interested in what I'm doing to see where it all leads. They're not sure it's going to lead anywhere. They just, you know, well, when I keep on showing up, they figure, well, he must be doing something, you know. They're not quite sure what. But in most cases, not really.
And they start understanding how much you care about it and how much it.
They don't really
means to
care
you.
that much that I care about something. Not really. You know, if I were to go back with an exhibition and they saw some images and a little bit of this, and maybe they could say, "Oh, I see what that guy was looking at." Then maybe something, but then they have to claim it on their own. I mean, I'm a strong believer that you can't really tell anybody anything. All you can do is set things up. If people come to their own conclusion, then they come to that conclusion. But there's no sense in telling anybody anything because we all got preconceived ideas of what's
Do
going on.
they start getting curious about what you're doing? or-
Curious just as a form of mild entertainment, you know? Because it's kind of boring in a little town, you know, and you got some guy from Kentucky with a camera, you know? It can be entertaining, particularly for kids, yeah. So, yeah, that's very much there. I don't know about curious. Some would be. I mean, I'm being a little bit facetious, but some of them would be, but the majority not really. Just curious that I'm there and what I'm doing.
And where's Kentucky?
I don't even mention it.
Now,
Any other questions?
now you've gone digital, do you ever show people the images on a laptop or something while you're there?
No, you know, I don't travel with a computer. So I don't.
Yay.
And now none of us might be traveling with computers if things keep going where they're going. But I don't. And it's just, I have a little iPad I do communicate and stuff like that. But I don't, and it's not that I wouldn't, and would be, and a lot of people do, and a lot of my friends do. But it's like, oh, look what I've got on my computer, and then that's it. I'd rather make a print. If I'm going to do that, I'd rather have a print and give it to them than. A lot of people with digital cameras, they take a picture, they show the person on the LCD the picture they just took of them, and then they go on, and it's like, oh, okay, you know, where's mine? So I don't even get into that. And I know it can be very efficient and very effective, and I just don't do it. I may do it in the future, I haven't ruled it out.
I was just gonna say, I'd be so curious, I'd wanna see it on a bigger screen myself.
Yeah, no, I know, yeah, I know. Yeah, I don't know what to.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and I don't have any particular answer for it.
Do you do much photo editing when you're doing a book or outside of cropping and whatnot?
Yes, you know, there's been a lot done on these ones here. And I won't get into all the techniques, but with digital, it's endless. Photoshop allows you endless manipulation of an image. And the little cubicle has kind of a darkroom manipulation of an image. You do the same thing with Photoshop plus a gazillion other things. Mainly what I do with the images is I desaturate. I'm not interested in that hyper-saturated digital look on the world, you know? So I back away, I go the other way on it. Purposefully, I might identify elements that I want to kind of hold, and then I'll desaturate areas to back it off and get a little bit more pastel painterly look. But apart from that, I don't do too much. Yeah. But I do that. Yeah. And that's actually tricky. Basically, the trick is to do something and have nobody realize it's been done. That's the trick. It's when it's been overdone that everyone, oh, what'd you do to that? You know, I'm not interested in what you do to that. I want it just like nothing was done to it, even though a lot might have been done to it. So it's that kind of thing. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you'd ever thought of, back to what we were talking about before, how they're not really preserving those buildings. Have you ever thought of filming you and your images and you talking what you just talked to us, and how, to me, that just seems like it would have a huge impact on them if it was shown as a piece that the town actually watched. And and that's basically have you ever thought that you could save India?
No, I think this guy Mountbatten thought he could save India. But a little film about this area, definitely in the cards, for sure. Yeah, and what it might be, I think I'd rather have someone from that area be the person in the image, but basically what you're suggesting is what would happen with that.
This seems, this has been really powerful to me, and I think just,
Yeah. No, it's definitely in the works. I think the first step is that I still want to do that pop-up exhibition and then a little film kind of a deal. Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much.